Great, thank you, Sanjana, and thank you for this panel, opportunity for moderating this panel. I already feel privileged to be hosting this alongside with such a accomplished member here. We've gone into life skills, and I think we're talking to converted here. Like, the people who are here are who believe in life skills, who believe in systems, enabling systems. I'll try my best to also, probe into our panelists today to go deeper into the nuances of this. And like the theme of this panel is, young people and life skills. The first thing that we want to do is, want to hear your own stories, all of your individual stories of, what inspires you or keeps you up at night when you look at life skills and young people together at that cusp. So would love to, know your own stories. Richa, maybe we'll start with you, and then move to Jigyasa and Abhishek. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nita, and really, really grateful to be here with wonderful people who inspire me every day in the audience and on the panel. To your question, I think firstly, because we're on a life skills summit, I have to admit I'm feeling very nervous today. So let's start with acknowledging how we are feeling. But honestly, a lot of what we do at Labhya stems from our own lived experience. And especially for me, I started my journey as an educator, and I entered my first classroom when I was 16 years old. So a lot of what I know about myself and the world came from being a teacher. And soon after, I realized that I could be the best instructor, I could be the most amazing English teacher in my classroom, but at the end of the day, I was not preparing my children for the adversities that they were facing outside of the classroom. And that made me question for many years what my role was and what education really meant for our children. And that's what pushed me to think more on how can we go beyond and how can we really, really think more deeply about what our children need, whether it's life skills. At that time, I didn't know any of this, and I've learned all of this in the journey. And that's what pushes me, because now when I walk into our classrooms, when I see the power of creating safe spaces for children and young people, what it can do beyond academic education and along with academic education, and that's what keeps me going every day.
Thank you, Richa. Lovely to hear.
All right. Thank you, Nita, and thank you everybody for being here. I am very pleasantly surprised that everybody is still energetic, still listening. I can still see people with their eyes on us. So really grateful for the attention and for also getting a seat on the table. I think when we talk about life skills for young people, I think getting younger organization on stages happens when we are standing on the shoulders of some of the best organizations that have done path-breaking work in bringing young voices to the table. So I want to acknowledge that I'm here because of the work of those organizations. To answer your question, first question, what keeps me up at night? The answer is nothing, because I sleep really well. I believe in the miracle that sleep is. But talking about things that I deeply care about, and Slam Out Loud deeply cares about when we think of young people and children, my own experiences with creative expression happened because a teacher complained to my mother that I was this child at the back of the class, engrossed in my own world, and my mother thought that putting me into different art classes would turn me into a social person, which did not happen. But I grew up in this small city of Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh, and the opportunities were so limited that I learned things like religious painting, I learned music, dance, and those opportunities were so transformative for me as a child that I felt that I found my voice there. And many years down the line, during college, right after college, I joined Teach for India and started teaching in a low-income community. I saw that my children did not have any such safe spaces to talk about what they wanted to talk about. When we think about young people and children, all the content, all the information that they consume is created for them by other adults. And where are children listening to children? What about children's voice? So my work started as a project in my own classroom where I brought in a lot of music, poetry, theatre into my class, and I saw how my children were changing because of that, raising their hands more, becoming more independent thinkers, thinking about their identity. But the turning of this into an organization happened when I was in a classroom in Kashmir. My parents are originally from Kashmir, but I never grew up there. And I ended up doing a poetry workshop in a classroom in Kashmir, where all children chose emotions like anger, confusion, sadness, hate to talk about when I took them through an exercise. Which made me and us at as well realize that for children, no matter what backgrounds they come from, safe spaces to creatively express are important and should not be taken away from them. And these are not spaces that are in service to academics or in service to getting a job, but these are spaces because they're humans and important for their humanity. So every child deserves this safe space to find their own voice, and that's why I do what I do.
Thanks, Jigyasa, for such an honest and deep sharing. I think it's also giving me goosebumps at the same time, just listening to your story. Thank you. Abhishek.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Thanks, Nita, and good afternoon, everyone. I think I'll try and bring in the employability lens into this question as well. A few years back when I started working in the employability space, we didn't have the vocabulary, or as Arjun will say, glossary, then to talk about it. So we started saying, you are doing the skilling work, skill development work for employability, but you need to have soft skills as well embedded into it. So that was I think the first initiation into this work 12 years back. And it remained an enigma to us. Like, you could crack the vocational side of it, teaching the academic side of it very well, but how do you take soft skills in the rural areas? How do you find that right, as Suchita said, a facilitator, which is most important in the classroom, and make that transfer of skills happen? So I don't think we cracked it ever. When I moved into another organization, one of the things that we did there was to really look at, okay, so we are getting young people jobs, and typically in the job there is a migration involved, which is nothing short of a sort of a crisis for a young person. She's probably not moved to a new city before. Suddenly the circumstances have changed. You are cooking for yourself. You are not getting your food there. You are packed into a room where 7 other girls are living with you, and all those difficulties. And typically, if there are people from skilling world here, you would know that the criteria that became for us was what is the kind of 3-month retention you have, what is the kind of 6-month retention you have of kids in the job. And what would you do as a skilling organization? You would start calling the young people, hey, are you still in the job? And God forbid if they said no, then you're like, why are you not in the job? My money is not getting paid because you are not in the job. So you almost dehumanize the whole process. And no wonder that young people stop taking your calls. And so you don't know where they are, have they returned back home, why was it that they returned, etc. So in this organization, we started looking at, can I convert my telecaller into a counselor? And this counselor then starts working with the young people when they are in training, tries to build a rapport with them, and then connects with them as a person who's trying to help them. So few things that we noticed immediately was that a longer connect was available for you. You were able to, young people were feeling like they could come and talk to you about the problems. I'm not liking the supervisor. I'm 12 hours of standing there on the work floor, not going to do that. I was abused today. Aaj kisi ne mujhe gali di. I'm not going to listen to it. And so a lot of insights started coming in as to, and again, talking to those of you who are in the skilling world, why young people decided to move from a very far off location to Bangalore for work and the same, and 2 nights later, suddenly without telling anyone, returned home and not telling anyone. So you said, and so this resilience, building the resilience in young people to withstand the adversity uh, became one very key aspect of our work in the employability. How do we make sure that not to tell you that you will not face these adversities? Your manager will be abusive sometimes. You will need to work 12 hours. It will be difficult life. But what are the questions you are going to ask yourself when these things happen? Am I going to get a better alternative when I return home? If not, how have people dealt with it? So on and so forth. Sorry for a long winding answer, but and that started giving us very clear sense that the answers, perhaps the employability answer, lie perhaps in the life skills domain more than the you learning whether fork has to be lifted from the left hand or the right hand. So that's where it started, and still learning a lot.
Thank you, Abhishek. And also like painting a picture of the reality of the world that, sometimes young people end up facing. Thank you. So, the next question that I want to do is, in the previous panel, we talked so much about systems and how systems will enable assessments. The first question that I want to start and, get all of your views on is, how do you get young people into this conversation? And also from 2 dimensions. So young people also is not a homogeneous category. It is diverse. It includes, some younger adults, who are still developing that vocabulary, also trying to comprehend, make sense of what does that mean. So I think it will be lovely to hear from your perspective on, what does it mean from preparing young people themselves? And how do systems kind of bring in young people into that conversation so that it's not, life skills is not something that is done to them, but it's with them. So with that in perspective, maybe Richa, we'll start again with you and then move.
Sure, thank you so much for that question. So I would look at it in 3 ways. The first is, like you mentioned, understanding that young people are not a homogeneous group. We have, when we enter public schools, we have children who experience various kinds of adversity, marginalization, and then our previous panel also spoke about the urban and the rural and the entire context. I think the first thing that we must do in action is, of course, acknowledge that young people are a diverse group of young people, and how can we get them to the table and truly co-create solutions alongside with them. And one example is, for example, when we partner with state governments to work on emotional well-being, part of the process is to pilot the curriculum with various groups of children and understand their feedback, what is working for them, what is not working for them. And I think that's one important part of this. I think the second is, like Jigyasa mentioned, also understanding that young people are not just receivers in the system, but we are also part of the action that creates the ripples in the system. A good example is how organizations like Dream a Dream and everyone else have really worked hard for decades to make sure that a Slam Out Loud and a Labhya are able to sit here, young people who are running young organizations, to take the baton forward. And really understanding that, thirdly, that young people are experts in their own life and lived experience. And so I may be a Harvard educated person, but a young person who's studying in a public school in rural Uttarakhand is a master's or a PhD in their own experience, and if we have to start equating both of those contexts together. And so how we define expertise is also one way that we can integrate young people into the system seamlessly, as it should be.
Yeah, thanks, Richa. Jigyasa.
Thanks for that question, Nita. I think about like the different stories that need to shift for young people to get a seat at the table. I think one of the big stories that is often told when we talk about like doing life skills to young people rather than with them is the story of scarcity. We think of often young people as not whole beings that come in with abundance, that come in with cultural competence, their own ideas, emotions, but as beings coming from scarcity, and shifting the narrative to seeing them as whole beings who bring a lot to the table, who do not need something to be done to them but with them, is one big narrative shift that we need to do. And we're doing it in the context of seeing how marginalized our young people are. So there's one kind of marginalization which is common to young people across, and then there's marginalization which comes because of intersectionality. There's gender, there's adversity, there's caste, class. So all young people are marginalized in the ways that when you think of it, none of them get to decide things like their names, their schools, where they're born, what they study. And when marginalization is starting from there, like it takes a huge shift in the narrative to think of these people who come in with a lot of competence and will co-create with us. So the first story, I think, needs to change there. The second sort of story is, and like in great pedagogy, like Paulo Freire talks about how the emancipation of the oppressed cannot be led by the oppressors. If we want more young people on the table, we need to be asking them more questions. We need to be involving them in processes. At Slam Out Loud, we try to involve our children in the curriculum we create. They are on our advisory board. They're also now partly involved in our hiring processes. And how do we ensure that we're not creating solutions which come from a skewed understanding of what our children need, but having our ears very close to the ground and knowing exactly what they're saying, what they're asking for, and then creating solutions for them. I think that's another big story that needs to change. And thirdly, the story that needs to change is us limiting outcomes for children and the idea of success to doing well academically or at best getting a job. Like when we will change the idea of success and outcomes to being beyond all of these and think of preparing children not for some certain future, but a life that they're currently living, that big narrative shift will give a huge impetus to building life skills, because children are not just citizens of the future. They are whole beings today who need to be nurtured and who need to develop the skills to do well in lives they're also living right now.
Yeah, thank you. Abhishek.
All right. Firstly, I don't know the answer really, I think, to this question. It's important. In UNICEF, we have this thing saying nothing for us without us, right? And I think we are at a stage where we are trying in YuWaah some of the things around how do we bring young people at the center. But it's an evolving area. We do not know the answers really on this. So what we're trying to do is to probably try and create a playbook around how we can have a meaningful exchange of information and ideas with the young people. It's not easy. I think sometimes you do this only as a ritual. You bring in young people into your conversation, give them a seat on the table, listen into them, but end up doing what you wanted to do, right? And so it's not easy to listen actively, process it in a way that it translates into your action plans and your strategies. Richa has been part of, in the past, has been part of our young people section team. That is one of the things that we brought in right in the beginning of YuWaah, where 2 young people served as our board members as well. Typically our board meeting will start with a charter of demands from young people saying, this is what we think YuWaah should be doing. And sort of immersing ourselves into that and making sure that we are listening in and we are acting on it needed many more layers. So it's not just enough to sort of work at the board level, but when you are having an internal strategy meeting, are young people participating at that point in time? Are they converting the strategy into an action plan or not? So at all levels you want it to provide space and And these are intimidating spaces for young people, right? Old people, young people are speaking some of them very articulate, um, speaking chaste English, and there you trying to get young people from all over. And if you want young people to be representative, then you don't only want young people who are convent educated, right? You also want young people from rural areas. So it's intimidating for them, and creating a safe space for them to say what they want to say is not that easy. And that's why I hesitate on this point, because it's going to take a lot for us to be that inclusive. But it's an effort that all organizations need to make. And I think, as I said, that charity begins at home. So got to start in your own organization first before we take it to the system.
Yeah, thank you. Some lovely nuggets of what I heard. One is, how do you open space? And therefore, how are you willing to change yourself first to enable and open that space? Then, lovely points on narrative changing, and multiple narratives have to change, not just at what we've heard about ourselves, but others, and what success is, what learning is, who is receiving, who is creating, and also acknowledging that this is not one homogeneous group. So, how are you keeping your eyes and ears, like you said, close to the people that you want to work for and with. Yeah, and I think this is a good pivot to move to the next question, which is on, how do systems prepare themselves for life skills? And when I talk about systems, I don't want to limit ourselves to education systems. Systems also including parents, communities, and what does that mean for parents to be holding space around life skills? India, our aspiration is everybody has to be an engineer. Everybody has to succeed in life in a certain way. So, how do changing that space and enabling that space, what does that mean in context of life skills and young people? Yeah, would love to hear your thoughts, and I'll flip the order now for more creativity here. Guess. Maybe we'll start in the middle, Jigyasa. We'll put you on spot.
Thank you, Nita. I think, so when it comes to systems, and especially since you talked about people around children, and we're thinking about parents, and we're thinking of families, and we're thinking of communities, we've all heard that children learn most by not what you do, not what you say, but what you do. And what does it take for parents, for children to model these life skills? So when we clearly know that children learn most from modeling, and we're saying people around children need to model, one of the things that, one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is, what are we doing to enable people around children to be able to also build and model these life skills? It's not, so the teaching of life skills or the enablement of learning life skills is not something that can be only limited towards children, for children to learn from. So what does it mean for parents to be more resilient themselves? What does it mean for parents to create that safe space among themselves? And these are not easy questions. These are difficult questions. If our children need to change, then all of us as a society need to change. And what sort of systemic shifts need to happen at political level, at the government level, at a family level? What does family even mean when we're talking about this systemic shift? I mostly have more questions in response to your question. But that's how I usually work. My name is Jigyasa, it means curiosity. Just a plug-in. But I feel like the questions that we need to be asking around like building life skills in children is, how do we enable everybody who's around the child to also build these skills? If we want to create safe spaces for children to find their voice, how do we create safe spaces for teachers to find their voice? How can a teacher who themselves feels that they're not empowered to use their own voice and agency create that in a child? So building those skills in parents and teachers and other stakeholders around children is as important as building those skills in children. And I think then that also extrapolates to other people involved in the sector, which is government officials. What does it mean for government officials to find safe spaces to express? What does it mean to have safe spaces for political leaders to build these skills again? And I've only come back to you with more questions.
Yeah, I think a valid question. What I've not felt, also from the enabling community, if they haven't felt, how would they create that experience? Like, you know, if as a teacher, if I've not felt what does it mean having a safe space, how will I ever create it for children, like in a hypothetical manner? And I think that's a great point. Richa?
I thought Abhishek was next. So 3 ways that I look at it, and similar views as Jigyasa. The first is when we look at a system, of course, children are at the center of the system. And from a life skills perspective and from just a life perspective, we need to acknowledge and understand and work with the understanding that children are change makers in their own lives. And that doesn't mean that the pressure to change their external and internal realities is solely born by children, but children have a lot of capacity, power, intellect, and just general sense and lens to own their lives and be change makers in the system. And so if life skills can play a role to actually enable children to understand systems in general, I think they will be able to navigate it much more. And we've seen this in some of our work more deeply where, for example, the happiness curriculum, we're working with Dream a Dream on it, is divided into 4 parts, which is self, family, community, and system. And so how do we connect our own well-being with the larger system? And children as young as 5, 6, and 7 years old, understanding that there are 4 lenses to look at things, I think can be an extremely powerful way to look at this. The second is parents and teachers. Unfortunately, when you walk into a public school with a parent, the parent is usually the one who feels the most small or smallest of all, because many of our parents are not conventionally educated. They rely a lot on teachers' expertise, and they feel like they don't have a big role in children's development. And so if we work, in the context that children are change makers, how can children create safe spaces for parents in the household? So in the happiness curriculum itself, there is just one line after each lesson plan. It says, "Ghar pe jaake seekho, samjho, suno." And so all the children have to do is go home and share what they did in the classroom. And we've seen some tremendous anecdotal ways where parents are coming to school and talking to teachers about what's happening in the classroom, sometimes for the very first time. And I think that can create such a big ripple when we talk about systems. And of course, lastly, talking about governments, I think Sucheta shared almost everything that I have on my mind. But like she said, and like we all, I think, are working towards, is how when working with governments, it's not enough to just advocate as civil society or put the onus on the teacher to simply implement. Government systems, government officials, we have to create space, give time and resources and effort to the program, and make sure that whatever we are designing with governments comes with a lens that in the end the government will own it, just like a math or a science or an English program. And how can we look at that end game together is, I think, another lens that we all need to co-develop as we move forward in the movement.
Thanks, Richa. Some lovely points in terms of, again, simple messaging and simple nuggets of how do you change that framework of parents being on the receiving side, but also how do they actively start engaging in the learning. Abhishek. Okay, cool. So, the next question that I want to delve deeper into is, which also came in the previous conversation, is contexts are not same, urban, rural, and I think there are even more layered nuances towards it, gender, there's intersectionality, there's my own identity. So how do you think life skills education can be that way to also process some of these deeper aspects of our own identities and also use that and build our agency to navigate through these complex realities. Again, would love to hear from your experience of having worked in that intersectionality domain with young people. What have been your experience, something that stood out for you, some learnings and insights? Richa, would you like to start?
Sure. Jigyasa, do you want to go first?
Sorry, can we have a mic there? Or
आप हमारी बातें सुन सुन के थक गए हैं.
हेलो मैंने सोचा कि आप लोगों को और थोड़ा सा एक्सप्लोर अगर हम अपने सवाल रखेंगे तो ज़्यादा बेहतर होगा. So that's what I'm so sorry to just peep in. I know we would get an opportunity to come forward for asking a query, but can I ask or
yes, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Sir, अब तो आपने माइक ले लिया, अब हम कुछ नहीं कर सकते.
No. I just put forward. I have to ask from Nita first. If she didn't allow, I sit and wait for it. Okay. So first of all, thanks a lot LSC for giving this wonderful panel. Why? Because practitioners are important, and when they are sitting and having that journey, Richa, Jigyasa are having that journey, so it's easy, individual like me or more could ask this question to put forward. So for me, I'll just give you a space where I'm working. My name is Furqan, and I have 14 plus of experience working in various domains. Now I am going back to my hometown. I am in my hometown. Having all these experiences there, my parents established an organization which is 30 years old. I am nurturing and reshaping that organization. It's a very small organization. The space where I'm working, that district is educationally and health-wise very low, not very progressive in indicators. In respect to life skill and education, I have a 25 years vision to work. One important thing which I always believe and helping myself is, I believe if you create institution, then there is no need to work. When those institutions activated properly, then the work, then things will come out. So that's a long-term vision I am working. I'm developing an ecosystem, trying to develop an ecosystem. Sorry.
Can you please
yes.
come to the question?
Yeah. So because then I couldn't get the answer which I want. I'm so sorry. Few more seconds. I wanted to develop an ecosystem which I'm working, which I'm targeting various stakeholders. I'm also running a confidence building academy. My parents established that in a form of a school 30 years back. Now, having an experience and studies all over, life skill is an important session. I recruited teachers who graduated 10th and 12th. I'm nurturing them. They did graduation, post-graduation, B.Ed. I'm trying to just inculcate values which I learned from people like Richa and U. And this is my confidence building academy which I'm doing. I wanted to ask from you, individual like me who was coming from a very, that kind of a district, very small space where we do not have the current word like this, to viral on the social networking website, and I always try to low there. What are the things, how do I achieve my this 25 years vision? And that would help me, and also people like me who are interested to work further in respect to life skills with the students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, firstly, for sharing your journey. Very courageous, and thank you for sharing the wonderful big vision that you have. I think my answer to you is let's talk over lunch and talk more about how we could partner and see, how we could take this forward. I think in action, in legacy, there is a lot of work that has happened. There's a lot of interesting things that are happening in the life skills space to build more confident, amazing young people. And I'm sure there are resources that, that we can support with and co-create along with. So thank you for that. To your question, Nita, I think in terms of an example of how we look at the intersectional lens when we are designing life skills interventions or just thinking about life skills in general. I think just one quick example is we last year started working with the government of Tripura, and part of our process is to enable a group of master trainers from the government system to become experts on life skills, SEL, and start co-creating the curriculum with us, because we believe that they have the lived experience of teaching in the system and being in the system to support us. We usually ask folks to send a volunteer or send us a list of folks who might want to be a part of the master trainer group. And we realized that a lot of folks who had volunteered were the majority Bengali speaking group from urban Tripura, which is West Tripura and Agartala. And however, there are almost 16 tribal belts in Tripura itself with a lot of wisdom in the roots which never really came up. And so for us as an organization, it became important to push back to the system and see how can we build a more inclusive group to begin with. And I think that also set a precedent for the system that when we are thinking about children and when we're thinking about all children, then even the folks who are designing have to be from those communities. And from there, we had tremendous learnings. For example, now we not only have a Bengali curriculum, but we have translated it into and contextualized it into local languages, trying to understand that even though the state curriculum is in Bengali, but many teachers teach in Kokbrok, which is the local language. So how do we localize teacher capacity building for that? So I think those are some of the ways that we are looking at intersectionality in the action part of our work.
Thanks, Richa. And I just want to probe you further there and, basically want to know, one is that you keep an eye on who's representing, whose voice it is, how do you make it more inclusive, but also how do you influence the others to also make space. And if you can probably add a little more nuance to this, so in your work with Tripura government, how did you engage that conversation with the government to ensure that it's a more representative group that you were trying to form? If you could talk a little more about it.
Absolutely. I think it all comes down to finding and building champions within the system, especially at the level where decisions are usually made, especially in the education system, which is fairly centralized at the state level. And I think part of our work became easier because we had such strong champions and such strong intentions at that level, where they were accepting of something like this. They had already agreed to do 30 minutes every day across all schools. They understood the need for it. They wanted to learn more about it. And I think we tried to nurture those relationships before we started pushing back on things like these, so that they make sure that we are building alongside with them, and that the lens is not us pushing something, but it's really to understand what the system also is, and of course to create equivalent spaces where we are listening to the system as well and not just telling them what we think is important.
Thank you, Richa. Jigyasa, if you would like to add your perspective.
Absolutely. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल फुरकान जी बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया शेयर करने के लिए, और बिल्कुल हम इस पे बात कर सकते हैं. हमारे पास जो भी स्लैम आउट लाउड में रिसोर्सेज हैं सब ओपन सोर्स होता है, हम वो शेयर करने के लिए बिल्कुल तैयार हैं. आपके टीचर्स को, आपके विजन को हम कैसे सपोर्ट कर सकते हैं ये मैं आपसे जानना चाहूँगी, और हम ईमेल्स पे भी आगे कॉन्वर्सेशन ले जा सकते हैं. तो आप क्रिएटिवली कॉन्फिडेंट थे और आपने अपनी आवाज़ यूज़ करी टू शेयर एन इम्पॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चन. आई एम ग्रेटफुल फॉर दैट, सो जस्ट वांटेड टू एड्रेस दैट. थैंक यू. Now coming to intersectionality, I think programs that do not think from a lens of intersectionality are non-inclusive programs, period. If we are not designing for the most marginalized children that we will be working with, then we are designing only for a few children. But once we design for the most marginalized child, it means we're designing something that is applicable to every single person. So at Slam Out Loud, जब हम starting में काम कर रहे थे और बच्चों के साथ पोइट्री, थिएटर, स्टोरी टेलिंग, इस सब से सोशल इमोशनल लर्निंग डेवलप कर रहे थे, हमने देखा कि जब बच्चे अपने आर्ट वर्क्स क्रिएट करते थे तो ज़्यादातर बार दे वुड टॉक अबाउट द इशूज़ दैट दे सी अराउंड देमसेल्व्स. लाइक द गर्ल्स वुड ऑलवेज टॉक अबाउट जेंडर, चिल्ड्रन वुड टॉक अबाउट issues that come from adversity, issues at home, even when we never categorically asked them to. But we knew that these were conversations that would come up in classrooms. Like gender is an important conversation to have. Religion in our country is an important conversation to have. And all over the world, climate action is an important conversation to have. And that's why all our curriculum, and with the learnings from the last couple of years, all our curriculum, all our trainings now have a gender and climate action lens. So हम ये facilitate करते हैं that arts can become a medium for children to learn about intersectionality. So we explore gender, stereotypes, biases, but using the arts, and while building socio-emotional learning skills, life skills. We explore climate action using the arts. So for example, think about how climate action is one of the biggest issues plaguing us as humanity as a whole, but the voice on climate action is only an elite voice. The communities that are most affected by climate action are not involved in that discussion. And when we talk about climate action with young people, the conversation is always and almost always about दुनिया जल रही है, नलका बंद कर दो, you know, and never engaging with their feelings on it, their perspectives, their local ecology on it. So at Slam Out Loud, we've tried to incorporate that, and we have, you know, knowledge partners. हम कहते हैं कि we're not experts in gender, so Girl Rising is a knowledge partner in gender to create that curriculum or to bring that learning in classroom. Or World's Largest Lesson is our partner in climate action through the arts, where we bring that information and engagement into the classrooms. And that intersectionality has really helped refine the conversations that we're doing in classrooms. At this point of time, I also want to mention how much intersectionality matters when it comes to people in leadership positions in organizations. Like how much diversity exists in the team. And have another one beautiful example that we saw. So we're partnering with the Haryana and Punjab state governments, and we're training teachers to bring in arts-based social-emotional learning into classrooms using the arts. You know, again, poetry, storytelling, all of these art forms. And when we were training teachers on how to bring conversations on gender in the classroom, it was led by a Slam Out Loud senior leadership person who belonged to the LGBTQ community. And them leading that space for teachers was transformative for Slam Out Loud, for that person, and for the teachers who were undergoing that training. So intersectionality also within the organization matters so much when people who are working with children also do come from marginalized backgrounds and co-create. That lends a whole new lens to what is being created and what output can be generated by young people.
Thanks, Jigyasa, and wonderful. And rightly said, no, if you design for the most excluded one, it's likely to work for everyone, but not vice versa. So very valid point. And Abhishek, I'll raise another question to you, which is on your prerogative on, you know, the employment context is changing rapidly. New jobs are getting created. It's changing so fast. So, you know, how can life skills education help young people in, you know, looking for more resilient future, more sustainable future ahead, and, you know, how can that relationship happen?
Thanks, Nita. So I think we can look at it in multiple ways, but let me look at it in a very transactional way. The employments and the job is sort of like, where do jobs come from? You've got businesses. Businesses bring the jobs, and therefore employers are the customers, right? In that sense, of the life skills that young people will have. And so we got to ask ourselves, what is it that employers are looking for? Turns out that, and Jarvi, you would know this very well, that employers basically are saying that it's okay not to have a specific vocational skill, but it's important that you present yourself well. It's important that you are confident. It's important that you structure your thoughts well. And those all fall in the realm of life skills. So for young people, I think it's becoming imperative, and it's in their, it's for us to make sure that we figure out a way to impart life skills in, whether it's a short-term skilling programs, whether it's long-term education programs, but really transfer those skills into young people in an effective way, because that's what is going to get them jobs, and that's what will that's what is going to keep them in the jobs.
Thank you. And I'll now open the floor, and I already see hands. Yes, you have a mic ready.
Of course, it has been there with me for quite some time now. So I have a lot of questions, but I'll just go with the most pressing one. So my question is that we are talking about gains. You know, what do we want to gain in terms of how do we want to look at our young people thriving, life skills education. So most of the conversations have revolved around what do we want to gain. I just want to shift the perspective and maybe just bring in another a lens as to what, as an individual, as organization, as experts that we are sitting here, and as system, what are some of the losses that we have to actually go through to be able to actually gain what we are wanting to gain, especially for that young person or that child, for them to thrive in their life with the fast-changing pace that's coming, for the challenges that are coming to them while they are employed. So just maybe from the panel as to what are some of the losses you went through to be able to hold, to be able to gain what you're gaining, especially keeping the child at the center or maybe the young person in the center. What are some of the things you as an individual, maybe as an organization, lost or maybe tried to lose or let go of to be able to get the intention fulfilled?
Lovely question. I'm wondering, should we collect a few more questions? I see hand at the back, maybe take first, and then you, and then here. So these 4 questions, and then we'll take them together.
गुड आफ्टरनून।
Yes, sir.
मेरा नाम विजय है और मैं अभी लाइट हाउस कम्युनिटी फाउंडेशन से हूँ। मेरा सवाल ये है कि जब हम लोग स्लम में काम करते हैं युवाओं के साथ, तो मेरा एक्सपीरियंस है, मैं 20 साल से स्कूल ड्रॉप आउट बच्चों के साथ काम कर रहा हूँ जो बस्ती में रहते हैं। तो मेरा ये अनुभव है कि उनके साथ जो भी फैसिलिटेट करने आते हैं, तो क्या जो उनका सच है, स्लम का सच जो है, जो बस्ती में बच्चे बिता के आते हैं, और एक ऐसा फैसिलिटेटर जो शायद 1 महीने की इंटर्नशिप करके या किसी बड़ी फलां यूनिवर्सिटी से आया है, तो उसके सच में और उसके खुद के सच को ज्वाइन करने में क्या चुनौतियाँ आती हैं क्या, या आती हैं तो उसको कैसे डील कर पाता है? सवाल।
थैंक यू। वी हैव वन मोर क्वेश्चन। वहाँ पे किसी और ने भी हाथ उठाया था।
Hi, my name is Ishani. I'm from Room to Read. Very similar questions to what has been asked. So follow up to that, if you can elaborate. What are some of the unlearnings, that you, as founders in this space or as practitioners, as young people actually who are exploring this domain, had to really unlearn? And how do you bring that unlearning into the work that you currently do, especially since you've gone to Harvard? And the question there is very similar. कि कैसे वो जो डिस्कनेक्ट है ग्राउंड की रियलिटी के साथ, हमने इंटरसेक्शनलिटी की भी बात की है कि बहुत अलग पहलू यंग पीपल फेस करते हैं, अलग प्रांत से आते हैं, अलग आइडेंटिटीज़ होती है, तो कैसे वो डिस्कनेक्ट को आप बिल्ड करते हैं, किस तरीके से ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल कैपेसिटी आप बिल्ड करते हैं? आपने कहा कि जेंडर का अगर हमें कोई समझ नहीं है, हम कोई जेंडर एक्सपर्ट को लाते हैं, ऐसे बहुत सारी चुनौतियाँ आप एज यंग फाउंडर्स आई एम श्योर फेस करते हैं. Also for you as well, Abhishek, how does UN look at it? Because my experience with the UN system has been that it's very top to bottom. So how do you get the people from the bottom to really, I know there's a extreme challenge there, as you've already articulated that, कि शायद ये बोलने में बहुत easy होता है कि young people को हम include करें, space दे, table पे बिठा दे, काफ़ी टोकनिस्टिक भी हो जाता है, तो कैसे हम इस शैकल्स को ब्रेक करें, यही मेरा सवाल है जो जुड़ रहा है दोनों सवालों से. थैंक यू.
Thank you. I think we should pause here. We've got 3 lovely questions. Jigyasa, Richa, and Abhishek, please go ahead. Yes, Abhishek start.
Ishani, right?
Tanya.
Acha, that was Tanya and Ishani behind you. No, but I started by saying that I don't know the answer to that point. How do we bring young people to the center? And is there a sustained way of doing it? Of course, it's very easy for us to be, as I was saying, ritualistic about it, right? Bring them in a particular event. If you have an event here, we'll bring some young people here to talk about it. But have that sustained dialogue with them to make sure that what we learn from them is internalized is not easy. And I think all that I can claim is that it's a question that's right there in front of us. We're thinking about it. We are putting that lens to everything that we are doing. But I don't think we are there yet.
Thank you for your question, Ishani. And I sort of also correlated your question with Tanya's question, which was about like, what are the losses we're ready to suffer? I absolutely love that question. What are we ready to lose if we really want to, cause any kind of transformation? So starting from our own elite status, and which is, you mentioned Harvard, recently went there, graduated. While I do come from a background where I was raised, as a child of Kashmiri migrants, my parents had to leave the place they grew up at, worked at. And while I feel that my own life experiences have given me opportunities to be close to the ground, I feel like it's a continuous journey of acknowledging our privilege and working on consistently relinquishing that privilege. And what does relinquishing that privilege look like? And that comes to Tanya's question on, like, what are we ready to lose? Like, what does losing privilege mean? What do you need to suffer to build what you want to build? I think the first thing you need to suffer is like having a very clear look in the mirror and think about like what are the things we need to change about ourselves if we want to do this work. We work in areas, we work with children who come from backgrounds that are often adverse, that are often backgrounds that we might never get a real understanding of. And what can we do to be more open, be people who listen more rather than speak more, be people who take space, but more than that also give space. So one is inner transformation. I think the other one is what we're ready to lose and we need to be ready to lose is power. When we say that we want to bring young people onto the table, it means losing power. And for me, often at Slam Out Loud, it means कि अगर हमारे बच्चे और हमारी टीम कोई आइडिया प्रेजेंट कर रही हैं और दे टेल मी कि जिज्ञासा यू हैव टू मेनी आइडियाज, हम ये नहीं करेंगे, हम कुछ और करेंगे, like I need to say yes and I need to agree and I need to often disagree and commit to. We might not often agree with people that we give power to, but we need to disagree and commit and share that power and give that power away. And giving power away is a very, very hard thing. So that's a loss I think that we need to suffer. And I think the third loss we need to suffer is being ready to fail. If we are not failing, it means that we are not being innovative enough. And often in the non-profit sector, failing is hard because of the pressure that is created by different entities, often funders, often other partners in the ecosystem, and we usually hear only stories of success. How do we become ready to fail and fail fast at that? How do we get ready to innovate? How do we get enough risk capital that we can really work on a theory of change and prove that our programs really work because we've failed so many times? I have a very quick example of failing that was so out in the public domain. So a couple of years ago, a media outlet reached out to us to write a story on our failure. And my first thought was, we are not even 4 years old as an organization, और ये हमें कह रहे हैं कि अपने failure के बारे में बताओ सबको. सारे funders पढ़ेंगे, everybody in the ecosystem will read it. And how will we grow? But we took the really, really hard step to talk about how we failed and did that publicly, even as a young organization, knowing that it could have real impact. And all we received was encouragement. All we received was more people asking us to take more chances. So we need to also let go of wanting to always succeed.
Lovely. I don't have any words. Richa, please.
I think +1 to what Abhishek and Jigyasa shared. To all three of your questions, I think the two thoughts that come to mind, the first is, at Labhya especially, we believe that those who are closest to the problem are the most appropriate people to solve the problem. And so if you look at my lovely co-founders, Vedant, who's talking away at the back, and everyone at Team Labhya has a resolve to solve the problem because they have either first-hand lived experience of adversity, of childhood adversity, or they have worked deeply with children who experience that kind of adversity. And that in itself comes with a tremendous amount of loss and a lot of unlearning that we have to do as we grow and build organizations. I think the second thing is around what we have to let go of. I think when we were building and we are continuing to build Labhya, the one thing that we have had to unlearn is that who we are is, what we had to learn, in fact, was who we are is enough. That who we are, where we come from, our own lived experience, all of that, and the children that we work with. As much as we believe in our children, we need to start believing in our own selves, our teams, and create that healing journey for our own selves so as to not replicate the intergenerational trauma that we usually hold within ourselves as we grow older into our teams. And the second thing is that sometimes doing things so that we can get and garner larger support in the long term is important. For example, I may come across as a person who is distant from reality because of my Harvard education, but in all honesty, a lot of the funding support that we started getting was because we had that label alongside with us, and maybe Jigyasa may agree, I don't know. And I think to acknowledge that lived experience is important, so is conventional expertise, and to constantly, like Jigyasa said, look into the mirror and see who we really are, acknowledge who we are, and go ahead with that journey as we build organizations. And lastly, being very acutely aware of what kind of organizations we are building. If Labhya is 25 people today, who are those people? Are they all English-speaking, urban, educated people? Are they young people who have a strong lived experience? And truly investing the time and effort in building those skills wherever required, but recruiting from a lens of proximity to the problem. Those are a couple of my thoughts. I hope I answered some of the questions.
Thanks, Richa. Maybe last set of 3 questions, 1, 2, 3. I think you've got a mic. Please go ahead.
Shall I start?
Yes, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Orlando. I just wanted to turn the conversation again back to employers. Because it seems to me that, in my experience with employers, the kind of employers that would take government school kids as entry level, they're very frustrated that they can't find the type of capabilities that they're after, and they may ask for certain certificates, but it's more of a sifting mechanism. They don't really attach value to those certificates. They just need a way to get through the enormous number of applications. So on the one hand, they're frustrated. On the other hand, they're often not nurturing either, right? So those who are brave enough to go into the jobs, as Abhishek was saying, often on migration basis, they're horrified by what they find, with very good reason, yeah? They don't often get an opportunity to learn. They're often neglected, even the rights are abused, et cetera, et cetera. So the general question to you guys is, in this engagement with youth for life skills, are employers, how much are you engaging with employers as part of that process? And how can that work? And what value can that engagement with employers bring to the building of the life skills? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Maybe one question.
Hi, I'm Dr. Heather. In response to these 2 very pragmatic questions, I want to give my inputs from my participative development background. We are talking about the life skill education, and all those things for various stakeholders. We also need to be talking life skills for ourselves. we the experts, we the people who are here, who are making generally decisions for them, that we need to be very, very empathetic, we need to be very flexible, very accommodative. So we need to be developing these kind of skills within ourselves. So that way only we can really fill that gap which is there between them and between us. Because we are two different communities, and it's a must that we bridge that gap. And also the other thing that generally, in the most of the time, we do participation for the sake of participation, which is a tokenism. That is not the true participation. The true participation has to be empowering. So we need to be very mindful from the day one that the participation has to be very, very empowering. And I can tell you one very pragmatic example, that whatever technology we have, this is the result of only 10% success. 90% of the technologies get failed only because there is no participation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I think we had one more question there. Yeah.
Yeah. So my question builds a little bit around what he just said. So we're talking about engaging with youth in the space of life skills. As somebody from an organization going and working in this space, you're coming in with a particular baggage, you're coming in with a particular lens with which you're approaching the problem, and your assumptions of what the problems may be and what life skills would address those. On the opposite side, you have the population that we're working with, and like you said, it is important to hear that voice, and that voice needs to also shape what we do. And the third piece in there, in my view, is hegemony, because what people think is okay and what people are completely comfortable with, which inherently may be wrong, is also something that needs to be stimulated and discussed. So how do you come to a common understanding of what one does need to actually work on or work with a population on?
Thank you. So we've got 3 questions. Okay, one last question.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Sushmita. I'm from Quest Alliance. So 2 days ago, the Chief Minister of Karnataka requested or ordered for 8,000 schools to be painted saffron. And as a collaborative, we're talking about safe spaces, systemic change. What is our response, or what should be the role of the collaborative to address issues of politics? And we can't escape from getting our hands dirty. So I just want to know what's your response to that.
Thank you. Important question. One last question, yeah. Do you?
Yes. I think the mic person can't see you because of the lights.
Thank you. I'm Nita from Udyam Learning Foundation from Bangalore. I really love the conversation about putting youth again at the center, and though it is challenging to kind of try and get that meaningful exchange going, but I wanted to push this a little bit further from a measurement, assessment, and data lens. And I think that could be perhaps one of the most challenging, is how do we bring youth into the conversation once we have data from these tools, once we have insights and information and findings, how do we empower them with that data and make it meaningful for them? And I think just the broader question there is also, how do we make that data more accessible, usable, applicable for multiple stakeholders? But here I'm more concerned about the youth themselves. And just in our experience of trying to find alternatives to psychometric scales so that we can have more usable data that's understood more broadly, and that where tools are also more inclusive, how do we kind of push to include youth in that conversation? And it's just something, just to share from the field, some comments we've gotten from a tool we pushed out from students where they say, ये हम क्यों कर रहे हैं, या इसका क्या होगा, इस assessment का क्या होगा. So just, I feel like there's a duty or responsibility we have when we collect this data to then go back to them and say, this is why we asked you these questions, and here's what we're going to do about it, and here's what you're going to be able to do about it because you now know this information. So just wanted to push that point again about bringing youth back to the center of the conversation, but from a measurement, data, assessment lens.
Thank you. So I know we are running out of time, so maybe I'll go in this order and maybe you can take questions whichever you think are most relevant for you, and then we'll conclude the session. Richa, we'll start with you.
Sure, maybe I could take the last question on measurement and data. I think a lot of us have echoed the same actions that we are trying to take, which is to make sure that we are able to invest in quality measurement, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, psychometric or not, for children and young people when it comes to life skills. But adding to that, like you said, I think we need to, like we have been talking about, and like we have been co-creating solutions with children, with stakeholders, with governments. I think we need to look at assessment in a similar lens, where, for example, people were mentioning in the previous panel, English, math, Hindi, science scores matter most, right? Who are making those tools in the government? Who's using that data and how has that become such a big measure of success? How can we replicate that for something like a life skills, where we talk about the intent of measuring this and what success looks like and how we can circle back? I think just quickly, the second thing before I hand it over is who is collecting the data, and how we also name assessments is a big conversation that we should have, and I'm sure some of us are having. We can't truly assess, and if we say कि हम एक test ले रहे हैं आपकी happiness measure करने के लिए, I'm sure that's not going to be useful even if we get authentic data, because of how much havoc it has already caused in the classroom. And so how can we look at measurement in a way which is simple, which truly communicates the intent of why we are looking at growth, and to very authentically and transparently communicate to governments, to teachers, to children, that this is to understand the efficacy of the program and see what's working, rather than how much you have grown in your empathy skills, etc. We are not there globally as well. So just a couple thoughts.
I will try to cover as much as I can. I have two really big thoughts. The one big thought is, yes, around data, and how do we use data as a tool to build our children's self-esteem, rather than saying to them, these are so many things you don't know, and here's where you need to go. And one of the ways a lot of organizations, including Slam Out Loud, are doing that by creating something like student portfolios that allow children to see their growth very holistically. We do it a lot through art, where children see their growth, see how they're learning, what they're becoming, who they are becoming, through their own growth in expression, in their self-portraits, in so many different ways, but also through the data that is generated back to tell them a story which boosts their self-esteem. I think it is not just the data or the shifts they've made in different skills that are important, but it's the story that builds a growth mindset in them that is important. And if we can find new, innovative, different ways of sharing that story back with our children, I feel that could be really powerful. My second big thought is again about power, and again connecting it to your question and your question. As organizations, sometimes we are in a unique capacity to challenge that power. Sometimes challenging power, when especially we're living in polarized times where we need to have conversations on religion, where we need to have conversations on politics in the classrooms, look like being an organization that refuses to accept money from organizations and people that do not align with your moral values. If you feel like a political decision is also a moral decision, then organizations need to take a stand, refuse those funds, and choose where we're getting our money from. I think that is one big way to challenge the power in the system. And similarly for employers, when organizations send their young people to be employed by the organizations, there is such a power imbalance between the person who is hiring and the person who is being hired. How might organizations work with these employers to become more nourishing spaces, more diverse spaces? How do employers realize that hiring for diversity is going to benefit them in the long term? And the role that organizations can play in employers realizing that is huge. Employers can negotiate power there. So I think both negotiation of power politically and negotiation of power in situations of employability is a big thing that organizations can do according to their capacity and in their own small and big ways.
Thanks, Jigyasa. Abhishek, last final words on employment.
No, sure. So, Olanda, you're back. I thought I wouldn't have to answer. Saw you walking up. Okay, so I'll just give you a quick anecdote on this. See, when you go to employers and talk to them about what is that you are looking from the young people, right, who are joining you as freshers, typically there is a little bit of a bias around asking for everything, right? So you want a fresher, and the HR head might be talking about a position which is that of HR manager, like someone with, he or she should be able to do this. Like your job description is everything that superhuman should do. So in one of the organizations where I worked, one thing that we tried to sort of cut through this whole issue of what really is needed in this first job versus what the HR manager is, was to really shadow this role for a while. So assume that for a week, you could be on the shop floor and really look at what is it that these young people are spending 80% of their time on. And if 80% of their time is spent on a few things, then what are the skills you require to make them very good at those 80% of the things and not spend as much time on the remaining 20% of things. The curriculum typically is designed to give equal weightage to everything that is required, while you might be spending 80% of your time on very few things. So that's one way to listen to or to experience what employers want. Apart from that, to me, it's a very clear business case here. Employers will very clearly tell you what they want, and thankfully they do want a lot of life skills, so shouldn't be very difficult in a sense.
Thank you. With this, I would bring this panel to the close. I know there are more burning questions which we can take during lunch. Sanjana and Sattva team, back to you.
Thank you, Nita, Richa, Jigyasa, and Abhishek for such an engaging. Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I forgot to plug in on this. Since Ishani, you asked this question, and then there were some more. UNICEF, and within that YuWaah, is working on something, concept called youth centrality, wherein in various kind of different organizations, whether it is CSOs, whether it is private sector, and wherever, how can we bring the youth centrality to the fore? So if any of you are interested in that work, happy to connect you to the team that is working on it. And Sattva's helping us so graciously on that work. So thank you so much, Ratish and team.